Welcome to Space to Lead, the podcast where leaders and teams come together to learn, grow, and thrive. I'm your host, David LeBlanc, and every episode will explore fresh insights and strategies that inspire leaders to create dynamic, engaging cultures. We'll dive into conversations with leaders and industry experts who are transforming teams and shaping the future of leadership. Whether you're leading from the front or working within a team, Space to Lead is here to spark ideas and help you lead with purpose and passion. So, take a deep breath, make some space, and let's lead together. Today's guest is Curtis Blais. I first met Curtis in 2011 when we were both students in a master's program at Royal Roads University. Since then, Curtis has built a niche practice specializing in supporting organizations with their cybersecurity needs. He's dedicated to helping businesses take a proactive approach to navigating this often daunting and potentially intimidating field. Curtis, it is so great to have you here today.
It's been a long time, and it's great to see you.
Yeah, isn't it crazy? We were chatting a little bit before hitting record. 10 years since we met at Royal Roads.
I know. In some ways it feels like yesterday, and other ways it's like, oh my gosh, how did the time go by so fast?
Flies so fast, and like many folks in the cohort, we've seen each other a bit on LinkedIn and whatnot, but haven't necessarily kept connected. So it's been really interesting recently to see some of the posts and the work you're doing around this cybersecurity space. I have to be honest, as an entrepreneur, that whole world is a little bit overwhelming and intimidating. And I can imagine it's probably the same for larger organizations as well. When you think about this space of cybersecurity, I'd love to just hear a little bit about your insights or your experiences in the work that you do, because I think it would be really valuable for leaders in any size of organization.
Sure, yeah. Well, you're right, absolutely right. Cybersecurity is kind of a daunting task. It's usually not a core business of an organization, yet it's something they have to spend time on, or there's some serious consequences. We know that I think some recent numbers, and you can see all kinds of numbers when you search, trying to do research for what a cyber incident costs. The last number I saw, somebody at a conference I was at just recently said it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.2 million when you have like a cyber incident affect your organization just to recover from. And that's rather significant for organizations. If you're larger, it could be larger given the amount of money ransomware guys are asking for. But you're absolutely right. So for large organizations, what I would say is that depending on how they're approaching it, sometimes you'll see them sort of take this off the side of the desk approach where it's not very formalized and they don't pay attention to it very much. And that's really challenging because most things don't get done without cybersecurity leadership, with somebody sort of guiding the ship and showing them the things they should be doing. I mean, they do some things, but not all of the things they should be doing, and it puts them at risk. It is a significant risk to their business usually.
Yeah.
And then small, I'll just jump to small too. Maybe talk a bit about the juxtaposition I've seen. Small business is tough for you, like as a small business owner, like very small, and I'm kind of in the same boat. Although I have the background, but it's really challenging because the universe of things that a small business needs to do to sort of protect themselves is the same for large businesses. And if they don't have the resources at the time, the skills, it puts them at an extremely, in a difficult position. So yeah, it's really neat to see that juxtaposition between large and small and how they handle the cybersecurity stuff.
And gosh, you talked about risk, and I have to say I got a bit of a chill when you said the average incident is 1.2 million in recovery. Is there like a percentage or stats about how often these kind of incidents occur in Canada?
That's a good question. I'm not aware of a number, a way to talk about sort of, what your just general, what's your risk of having it happen. I would think, based on my experience, the ones that are prepared, have a lower risk of this thing happening, and the ones that are sort of side of the desk and not really prepared, you'll see it a lot more. It happens every day. It's constant, nonstop. That's what makes this role and being a kind of a leader in this space interesting because it's never really the same. Think of AI, like we're all talking about AI these days. It plays a role. Like the phishing emails you get are, you used to be able to coach people and say, when it looks like it's grammatically incorrect and weird, that gives you as a sign. We don't see this much anymore because the bad guys can use AI to generate a very, very convincing, with no grammatical errors, email. And now that's one of the things that comes out of your kit bag when you're helping small organizations. So, um, it, if you're not prepared, it's really possible that this will happen because it is prevalent. It's happening every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And even my experience as well, the sophistication of these things and these really well-crafted emails, David following up on our conversation. And then, of course, I'm getting older and I'm like, did I forget? And, yeah, they're getting very sophisticated for sure.
Yeah, 100%. I actually just I actually had an incident happen. I'm a cybersecurity professional. I've been doing this my whole life. And I fell for one not long ago. I published it on LinkedIn. Just the general bit of it was, and it must be the psychology. So I was interested in this weight set, and I saw them advertising it as super cheap. And I'm like, that should be your first bill. And I know better. But the psychology was, So I did a bit of investigation on my own, right? Just checking. They had a website and it had other equipment and all this other stuff. And I'm like, and then, it was the amount of money. And then I did it. I put the deposit down. And for me, it was that risk calculation, right? It's like, okay, well, how much am I willing to risk to potentially get the reward out of this? So I did it. And then, there's a couple of clues that were like, that's not a good sign. And sure enough, it turned out to be a scam. And thankfully, it was a credit card, and they reversed it for me. We caught it initially, but I'm susceptible. And I think it's the psychology of it, right? It's like, oh,
Yeah.
it's right close. It's right on my risk line, and I did it.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I suspect most of us have a story like that, the the credit card purchase. Mine, I recently got delivered a fake engagement ring. And I'm like, where did this come from? And then I did some research and it's all part of this elaborate scam. So I think we all have those stories. When you think in a business setting, what are some things that we should be aware of?
Uh, well, I think one of the things that I spent a lot of time over the last, since we've in our master's cohort 10 years ago, helping people formalize their programs. And what I mean by that is sort of in the vein of that question, what should they focus on? They should make this something that's, a legitimate part of what they do on a daily basis. I know it's painful, and most people, again, that's not their core business, but in our digital age now, you certainly can't get away from it. You have to spend time on this, and resources to protect yourself. There's so many different motivations for the bad guys. It could be, organized crime. There's a recent stat that talks about, if you added up all the revenue from cyber incidents, it would be, if it was a country, it would be the third largest GDP on the planet. 10.9 trillion dollars. And it's just behind, United States, China, and United States. United States is the biggest GDP, but it's be like at the third largest GDP on the planet. So it's constant. It's constantly going. So businesses need to realize that. I often hear them say, nobody's interested in my stuff. And the truth is, you're right. They're not interested in your stuff, but they know you are. And once they ransom it, they know you want to pay, or steal it, or try and damage your business or your credibility. They know you're going to be motivated to pay. So businesses really need to take this seriously, small and large. Doesn't matter the size. It's a problem for all.
Yeah, gosh, when you share those numbers, it's mind-boggling.
It is. Yeah, it's staggering what's going on out there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, can you tell us a little bit more about the type of work that you do with organizations to help them build these more formalized plans? Because I know that's a lot of work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of when I'm brought in at that point, it's usually at the point of them saying, we're cognizant of the fact we want to do something a little more formal, but we don't really know how. You can download templates on the internet and stuff, and a lot of people try that, but um, if unless they're focusing on it on a regular basis and have somebody who's versed at it, it usually doesn't go very well. And so they get part way. I don't know how many places I've been where I've looked at what they have and basically said, listen, I know what you were trying to do, but we really need to start from scratch here because you're not only you're missing stuff, there's stuff in here that doesn't really help you in the way that I think you want it to. So what I do is I typically go in and say, okay, well, let's look at, and I use the frameworks. There's a ton of frameworks out there which are designed to help guide you through the process of actually getting to the place of having a more formalized program. And so over time, I realized I was sort of repeating myself and doing the same thing. So I started building materials and stuff, and I take that with me. And I literally can come in with a program and say, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. Here's all the pieces we need, and work them through the process of sort of educating the executive a little bit and showing them what we're doing, and then using the material to actually draw what I sort of call a line in the sand, and that is. Um, it usually starts with a security policy, very general kind of document, but gives the direction in where they should go. So it's sort of leading them to where they need to go. And then below that, I have a whole series, I think it's up to 30 now, of what I call cybersecurity standards. And those are the things that set the directives on how they will do certain things. It's fascinating to me. I go into organizations. Some of the worst documents I've ever read are cybersecurity policy documents because they somebody tries to drop everything in there. They like you hear the word procedure and you hear guidance and you hear standard and those are all different things. If you look them up, I do a presentation that sort of talks about how they're different and how you should use them. And if you extract them out, there's power in modularizing that stuff and pulling it apart and then using it to support the formalization. So I usually walk them through that whole process, and at the end, we have a full slate of they have a cybersecurity policy that's approved by the executive, and they're working their way through approving these standards to set what they need to do to sort of protect their organizations.
Yeah. So it seems like at a starting point, there's a lot of educating that you have to do. Is it difficult to influence executives and get them on board?
In some circumstances, yes. The news helps me a lot because they'll see something in the news. That's a lot of the I think that's a lot of the motivation that they'll see what's happening and realize, okay, we gotta be more serious about it. Or something else happens. Maybe they need to expand and their partners are saying, listen, we need you to be a little more serious about your security or formalized about your security. Or they know somebody who goes through an event like it actually happens to them and then they freaked out. There have been circumstances where we struggled up against, hey, we're small or mid-size and we can't. And there's quite a bit of working them through having the same discussion that we're sort of having about, listen, there's this universe of things you got to do and it doesn't really change. Like it's not, if you're small, nobody's going to ransomware you. No, that has nothing to do with it. It's there's this group of things that you really need to focus on and working them through, just having that discussion and building some credibility, maybe some small things, small wins, show them some things and help them with something they're struggling with, kind of the, pull the thorn out of the paw kind of approach. And once you've done that, then they're willing to listen a little bit more.
Mm. And it's interesting because you've talked a few times about smaller businesses, entrepreneurs, and whatnot. Are there any supports or is there a good starting point for an entrepreneur who maybe is wanting to create a bit more robust of a program?
Yeah, there can be. So I've done something with a bunch of organizations. I'm doing something now with kind of a national scale where we do an assessment first. There's a kind of it's a self-assessment. So where organizations can answer a series of questions, and what pops out is it shows them where the areas of risk exist. I like to do a risk based because as you look at it from a risk perspective, you can you can start with the stuff that's the highest risk to your organization. And when you're doing that, you're pulling a lot of risk out. I think your question is very salient, because that's the question I get almost all the time. Where do I start? And so when we do it this way, if you look at what seems to be the highest risk, you start there because you're pulling the most challenging things out, right? And you're sort of starting to work on them from that perspective. And that gets a lot of traction, especially with the executive, of course, and boards. They don't speak a lot of languages, but boards definitely speak risk very well. So you can have that
Mm,
conversation.
yeah. Nice, nice. Gosh, this is fascinating. And you make it sound more interesting than when I'm reading about all the requirements in a contract when it comes to cybersecurity. So thanks for bringing a little bit of life to the topic because it can be a bit overwhelming. You have a new book coming out. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I don't know if you remember, but back in our master's cohort, we went around the room once and we were talking about something we wanted to do, and I had mentioned it back then. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but about 6 years ago, I kind of got serious about saying, I'm seeing these repeating patterns. Maybe I should articulate it. And do you remember from our master's days, we took all those tests learning about who we were and what we were. And I did my Myers Briggs, and it shocked me a little. I actually thought I was an introvert before I went to that class. I know that sounds crazy, um, but it showed me something about myself. Anyway, my Myers Briggs put me in as an ENTP. And if you look at what that, what kind of person that is, I have this. They're naturally one of those people who want to simplify stuff. And so while I was doing this security stuff for organizations, I'm seeing these patterns and I'm simplifying. No, no, that's too complicated. I could do this, and it started to work. And so 6 years ago, I said, I should probably start something here. So I started writing, and I didn't know exactly where I was going. Writing is a really interesting thing. If you ever decided to write something larger, write lots of reports, but a book is a totally different approach. You stare at a white piece of paper until blood starts dripping from your forehead. It's sort of like that approach. It was really interesting. Anyway, I started going, and I didn't know where I was going, but I started putting down things that made sense to me that I was working on. COVID hit, I had some family things happen, so I set it aside. And just a couple of years ago, I picked it up again and started doing some stuff. And how I got to where I was able to organize it the way I did was my wife and I did a bucket list trip last year. We went to Africa and did an African safari. And while we were going there, we had to fly through Europe, and so we're in Frankfurt heading to Nairobi, Kenya. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but as you walk up to the plane, you look at it, and this plane is huge. It's a huge plane. I look at it and go, there's just no way that thing flies. Just no way. Like it's this huge thing. But sure enough, you get in and you end up where you're supposed to go. And so I had happened to also have had a conversation an aeronautical engineer. I was sitting beside him on a plane once, and he was explaining to me how planes fly. And he said to me, Kurt, if you get the four things right, it's lift, weight, drag, and thrust. If you get those four things in the right combination, it'll fly. And in this moment that I can't even explain, where I'm looking at this plane on the tarmac in Frankfurt, Germany, and I'm thinking about it, there's no way. And I think about those four things, and it just dawns on me. There's these four things that you need to do to get your security program off the ground. And so I was about maybe 2/3 done writing the material, and I came back and I had to reorganize everything. This is, I would remember telling my kids as they were growing up, write an outline when you're doing a report. I should have done that, but I never did. But 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 I realized these four things, and the four things are risk, class, design, which I break into two things, and control. Risk, class, design, control. If you do those four things, it sets you up on a really firm foundation to build a security program, a successful one, right? And it doesn't have to be complicated. Like, for example, class. As soon as I mention class to organizations, they usually sort of, kind of grow a little pale and go, classifying data is crazy. I worked with a guy who was from CSIS, and he said to me this is in a financial institution. I said to him, we're going to do this. He says, Kurt, at CSIS, we had a group of like 220 people, and all they did was classify data. We can't do that here. I said, no, there's a simpler way. And so I talk about it in the book, how to go about making sure you have a classification for data. And the whole point of doing that is that I will treat data differently depending on its classification. And it sounds so simple, but it's super powerful. So the book's called Cyberdynamics, and it's actually coming out in December. I'm really excited.
Really looking forward. I know it's available for pre-order now. We'll definitely share some links to that with the podcast details. And I'm hoping that we can get you on again once the book comes out to go into a little bit more detail about the simplified model that you've developed that's going to make this really easy for us entrepreneurs as well as leaders in larger organizations.
Well, I would love to come back, absolutely. And we can certainly talk about it. It's still a lot of work. It's not that there's a lot to do, but formalizing it, there's a really easier way to do it than people are doing it now.
Beautiful. Well, thanks so much, Curtis, for creating the space for this conversation today. I look forward to your book and our next conversation.
Oh, it's great to catch up, David.
Thank you for tuning into Space to Lead. If you enjoyed this conversation with Curtis, you'll want to check out his upcoming book, Cyberdynamics, The Art and Science of Building a Simplified Digital Security Program. A link to pre-order your copy is included in the episode notes. Thank you for joining us, and don't forget to follow Space to Lead so you never miss an episode.